March 14, 1920. Western State Hospital, Staunton, Virginia. Dr. Margaret Thornhill's hands shook as she closed the patient file. Across from her sat a 10-year-old boy with dirt still embedded beneath his fingernails. His eyes never left the floor as he spoke. He described the location of his own grave. Not a dream, not a delusion, a memory. The pine box had a split along the left panel, he whispered, his voice thin and distant. Dirt kept falling through the crack. It filled my mouth. I tried to scream, but nothing came out. The boy had been admitted 3 weeks earlier with no name and no records. He was found wandering along Route 11, barefoot, disoriented, his clothes stiff with red clay soil. No missing child report matched him. No family came forward. But he shouldn't have known about the unmarked cemetery behind Ward 7. That section of the grounds had been sealed off since 1903. The graves there were never documented. They didn't exist on any official map. Most of the staff believed the stories were rumors. Hospital folklore meant to frighten new attendants. Yet when Dr. Thornhill ordered excavation at the precise spot the boy described, the shovel struck something solid within hours. A child-sized coffin. The soil above it showed signs of recent disturbance. Inside were details that would force the Commonwealth of Virginia to confront a horror hidden within one of its most trusted institutions. But the truth behind that coffin was far more terrifying than anyone was prepared to face. Before we uncover what happened to the boy who remembered being buried alive, make sure to subscribe to Hypnotic Histories and ring the notification bell so you never miss our deep dives into America's darkest forgotten cases. Drop a comment below and tell us where you're watching from. We love hearing from our community of mystery seekers around the world. Now, let's descend into one of Virginia's most disturbing institutional secrets. Virginia, 1920. The Progressive Era cast a long shadow. This was supposed to be a time of reform and renewal. Women had just secured the right to vote. The Great War had ended less than 2 years earlier. America was modernizing, optimistic, forward-looking, convinced it was leaving brutality behind. But beneath that promise, the nation's asylum system was quietly collapsing. Western State Hospital in Staunton stood as a monument to that contradiction. Founded in 1828 as the Western Lunatic Asylum, it was the first psychiatric institution west of the Blue Ridge Mountains. Its original design, a tribute to Thomas Jefferson's architectural influence, featured open grounds, sunlight-filled wards, and treatment rooted in moral care and dignity. By 1920, that vision had decayed beyond recognition. The hospital housed more than 1,400 patients in buildings meant for fewer than 300. Men and women slept 3 to a bed. Some slept on floors. Hallways became makeshift wards. Privacy vanished entirely. The manicured therapeutic grounds were no longer places of healing. They had been converted into work farms. Patients labored without pay, producing food and goods sold to local businesses. Profits used to prop up a system already failing under its own weight. Staffing was catastrophic. One physician was responsible for nearly 200 patients. Attendants worked 16-hour shifts for wages unchanged since before the war. Most had no medical training. They were locals desperate for employment, instructed to follow orders and ignore what happened behind locked doors. And looming over everything was Virginia's rapidly expanding eugenics movement. By 1920, the belief that certain lives were disposable, unfit, defective, better erased than treated, had seeped into policy, medicine, and law. Institutions like Western State were no longer places of care. They were places of disappearance. And somewhere within those overcrowded wards, a child had been buried alive. The previous decade had seen the establishment of the Virginia Colony for Epileptics and Feeble-Minded, an institution where forced sterilization would soon become official policy. Mental illness was no longer viewed as a condition to be treated, but as a hereditary flaw to be eradicated. Patients were no longer citizens to be healed. They were liabilities to be controlled, problems to be managed, contained, and forgotten. Into this environment came the children. Ward 7 housed those the institution classified as juvenile defectives. Children as young as 5 were committed there, sent by parents who could no longer control them, by courts overwhelmed with orphans and petty offenders, or by families who simply wanted them erased from their lives. Some had genuine developmental disabilities. Others had committed quieter crimes, being poor, being unwanted, being too difficult, too emotional, too alive for the comfort of their guardians. The Superintendent of Ward 7 was Dr. Clarence Whitmore, a graduate of the Medical College of Virginia, who had overseen the children's section since 1912. He published widely on what he termed the genetic inferiority of institutionalized youth. He believed in discipline, in breaking what he called the defective will, in preparing these children for lives of manual labor, the only future he believed they deserved. His assistant, Nurse Helen Grayson, had worked at Weston State for 15 years. Older staff remembered when she had been kind, even gentle. Something changed after her son died during the influenza epidemic of 1918. She returned to work 3 days after the funeral and never spoke to him again. Patients in Ward 7 learned quickly not to cry in her presence. The winter of 1919 into 1920 was especially brutal in the Shenandoah Valley. Coal shortages left entire wards unheated. Food rations were reduced as Virginia's agricultural economy struggled to transition from wartime production. In January alone, 12 patients at Weston State died from causes listed as exhaustion or organ failure. Medical euphemisms that meant they had simply wasted away. Children dying in institutions was not news. It wasn't even unusual. What made March of 1920 different was the boy with no name, the boy who remembered things he should not have known, things that suggested death was not always the end of a child suffering at Weston State Hospital, the boy who knew too much. The first police report came from Sheriff Thomas Brennan of Augusta County, dated March 2, 1920. It documented a response to a call from Ezra Mitchell, a farmer on Route 11, 3 miles south of Staunton. Mitchell discovered a male child, approximately 10 years of age, wandering in a southern pasture at dawn. The child was nonverbal, covered in red clay soil, wearing only a thin nightshirt despite near-freezing temperatures. No visible injuries. No response to questions regarding identity or origin. The boy was transported to Weston State Hospital for evaluation and care. The admitting physician, Dr. James Caldwell, noted the child's condition: severely malnourished, showing signs of prolonged exposure, fingernails packed with soil, and what appeared to be with splinters embedded in the skin. But it was the clay that troubled him. The deep red coloration came from a specific soil type found in only a few locations around Staunton. The boy's hair, skin, and clothing were saturated with it, as if he had been buried in it. For the first week, the child did not speak. He accepted food but ate mechanically, as though the act held no meaning. He refused the bed, instead curling into the corner of his cell-like room, facing the wall. When other children approached, he recoiled with a terror that felt instinctive, primal. Then, on March 9th, he spoke. Nurse Dorothy Hayes recorded the incident in her daily log. Patient John Doe, admitted 3220, began speaking at approximately 2 p.m. First words were, "I can still hear them crying." When asked who was crying, patient became agitated, repeating, the others in the boxes." Patient described being underground in a wooden box, hearing children crying through the dirt, mentioned seeing light through a crack, drew picture rectangular boxes arranged in rows, became hysterical when asked to elaborate, required sedation. Dr. Margaret Thornhill was called to evaluate the boy the following day, a rare female physician in a field dominated by men. Thornhill had built her reputation on a radical approach to childhood trauma listening. The hospital tolerated her methods because she was exceptionally skilled at securing funding from charitable foundations. What the boy told her should have sounded like delusion, a fever dream, the fragmented imaginings of a disturbed mind. Instead, he described waking in darkness, surrounded by wood, the smell of fresh-cut pine mixed with damp earth, the crushing sensation of weight pressing down from above. He remembered adult hands lifting him from the box. A man's voice saying, "This one's still breathing." Clarence was wrong. He remembered being carried through darkness, pushed through a gap in a fence, and told to run, to never come back. Then he described the place. Behind a brick building with barred windows, past a grove of oak trees dead on one side, beside a stone foundation where a barn once stood, Dr. Thornhill felt ice crystallize in her veins. The boy had just described, with exact precision, an abandoned section of Western State Hospital's grounds, an area patients never access, an area most current staff did not even know existed, an area not marked on any official map. For the next 2 days, Dr. Thornhill worked in the hospital's archives, a musty basement room filled with century-old records. She found what she was looking for in a leather-bound ledger dated 1903, the Potter's Garden, Western State's former burial ground for indigent patients, those without families, those the state preferred not to remember. The final recorded burial was November 1903. Officially, the practice ended there. But a hand-drawn map tucked inside the ledger told a different story. Rows of unmarked plots, dates extending into 1904, 1905, even 1907, years after the cemetery's supposed closure. In the margins, faded pencil notations. Juvenile, cause undetermined, family notified, remains declined, dozens of children, no names, only ages and dates. When Dr. Thornhill brought the ledger to hospital superintendent Dr. Charles Morrison, his response was immediate and defensive. "These records are outdated and unreliable," he said, refusing to meet her eyes. The facility operated differently in those years. Many death ledgers were lost in the fire of 1911, and what you're suggesting is preposterous. He paused. "We are a healing institution, Dr. Thornhill. We save lives." "Then let me examine the area the boy described," she replied calmly. "Let me prove he's delusional. End this matter definitively." The silence that followed stretched far too long. Morrison's jaw worked, grinding something unsaid between his teeth. "That section is structurally unsound," he said at last. "There are liability concerns. I can't authorize access without approval from the state board, and that could take months." He stood, signaling the meeting was over. "The boy is clearly traumatized by something that happened before he arrived here. Focus on his treatment. Doctor, not ghost stories." But Dr. Thornhill had already noticed something. When she mentioned the oak trees, the ones dead on only one side, Morrison's eyes had flickered. Just for a moment. Recognition. He knew exactly where she meant. The night visitors. 2 nights later, March 13th, the boy began screaming. Nurse Hayes' incident report captured the chaos. 11:47 p.m. Patient John Doe began screaming repeatedly, "They're coming back for me." Upon entry, patient was attempting to force his body through the barred window. Claimed to have seen the burial man outside watching him. Described a tall man wearing a black coat and carrying a spade. Patient incoherent and inconsolable. Required restraint by 2 attendants. The description matched no one on staff. But the following morning, the head groundskeeper approached Dr. Thornhill with something troubling. He had found fresh boot prints beneath Ward 7's windows. The prints led away from the building, toward the abandoned section of the grounds. Beside them were drag marks in soil, as though something heavy had been pulled across the dirt. That same week, 3 more incidents sent cracks through Western State's carefully maintained facade of normalcy. On March 14th, a maintenance worker repairing plumbing in Ward 7's basement discovered a locked door concealed behind a false wall. The door opened into a tunnel system, hand-dug passages leading toward the old cemetery grounds. Inside, he found a wheelbarrow. In the wheelbarrow were child-sized restraints and a coil of rope still crusted with dried red clay. On March 15th, 2 children in Ward 7 fell violently ill, vomiting, high fever, tremors. Their symptoms matched arsenic poisoning. Both had accepted candy from Nurse Helen Grayson earlier that day. When Dr. Caldwell ordered the remaining candy tested, Grayson claimed she had already disposed of it, saying it appeared spoiled. On March 16th, the boy found wandering Route 11 saw Nurse Grayson from across the courtyard. His reaction was immediate and visceral. He collapsed, gasping for air, repeating the same words over and over. "She put the dirt on my face. She put the dirt on my face and said I'd sleep forever." That was Dr. Thornhill's breaking point. That evening, she did something no physician at Western State had ever dared to do. She contacted the press. If this story is sending chills down your spine, hit that like button and share it with someone who loves dark history. What comes next is even more disturbing. The excavation. March 17th, 1920, dawned cold and gray over Staunton. By 8 a.m., a crowd had gathered outside Western State Hospital's gates. Reporters from the Staunton News Leader, the Richmond Times-Dispatch, and even the Washington Post had arrived. Dr. Thornhill's midnight telegram to a journalist she trusted had ignited a media firestorm. Superintendent Morrison had no choice. To deny access now would be to confirm the worst suspicions. He authorized what he called a limited examination, intended, he said, to disprove spurious allegations. Sheriff Brennan arrived with 3 deputies and the county coroner, Dr. Albert French. Dr. Thornhill led the group, the boy walking close beside her, his small hand clenched in the fabric of her coat. When Morrison objected to the child's presence, Thornhill's reply was immediate. He's the only one who knows where to dig. Unless you prefer we exhume every grave on these grounds. They passed Ward 7, the dead oak trees, the collapsed stone foundation of a long-abandoned barn. The boy stopped. "This one," he whispered, "third in from the oak." I counted. The deputies began digging. 3 feet down, the first shovel struck wood. Dr. French brushed soil from the coffin lid. It was cheap pine, already rotting. When the lid was lifted, even men who had witnessed death all their lives stepped back. The coffin was empty, but it had not always been. The inside of the lid was scored with scratches, deep gouges where small fingernails had clawed desperately at the wood. And on the left side, exactly as the boy had described, a crack split the boards. Through it, someone could have seen the light, could have breathed for a while, could have screamed into the dirt above. The scratch patterns, Dr. French said calmly, clinically, are consistent with someone regaining consciousness after burial. The splintering beneath the fingernails supports this. He paused. Someone was alive in this box. One of the journalists turned away and vomited. "Keep digging," Dr. Thornhill said quietly. Her face had gone pale, but her voice did not waver. He said there were others. By noon, 6 more graves had been opened, 4 empty, each showing signs of struggle. The soil above them was loose, recently disturbed. Someone had opened them, removed their contents. But where had the bodies gone? 2 coffins still held remains. The first was a girl, perhaps 8 years old. Decomposition limited certainty, but her posture told the story. Arms raised, fingers curled against the lid, knees drawn tight. She had died trying to escape. The second was worse. This child had been buried face down, in a coffin built to hold a body on its back. Someone had forced them in while they struggled, flipped them over, and nailed the lid shut while they were still moving. Reporters wrote frantically. Sheriff Brennan shouted into a telephone, demanding immediate state investigators. Superintendent Morrison had vanished. Dr. Thornhill stood apart, ledger in hand, matching graves to entries. Her finger stopped. Patient 447. Female, age 9. Expired April 12, 1903. Acute melancholia. No family notification. Interred Potter's Garden, April 13th. Below it, in different handwriting. Burial premature. Error discovered by groundskeeper. Remains removed and reinterred with proper procedure. Incident not for record. The date of that note, April 15, 1903. 2 days later. 2 days underground. They knew, Dr. Thornhill whispered. Someone knew this was happening, and they covered it up. The tunnels. As excavation continued, deputies explored the tunnel system beneath Ward 7. What they found transformed tragedy into proof. The passages connected the children's ward to the old cemetery, hand-dug, reinforced with stolen timber. A private route for moving bodies unseen. But midway through the system, they discovered something else. A widened chamber, a workspace, a table made from scavenged boards. The chamber contained a work table fashioned from salvaged wood. On it lay medical instruments, scalpels, bone saws, forceps, alongside bottles of formaldehyde and stacks of handwritten journals. Dozens of journals. They were all in Dr. Clarence Whitmore's handwriting. Page after page documented what he described as therapeutic interventions on child patients. Sleep deprivation, experiments designed to observe the degradation of what he called defective minds. Starvation protocols intended to test the resilience of inferior genetics. And most disturbing of all, burial simulations. Controlled experiments meant to measure fear response in juvenile subjects. One entry, dated January 1920, read, Subject 23, male, age 11, sedative administered at half dose to ensure partial consciousness. Placed in containment box and buried at shallow depth for easy extraction. Subject remained conscious approximately 20 minutes before lapsing into unconsciousness. Retrieved after 45 minutes. Subject survived but exhibits marked psychological deterioration. Memory of event appears fragmented. Proceed with next phase. The next phase never came. Because someone, the journals did not say who, had pulled the boy from the grave before the final observation could be completed. That boy wandered until Ezra Mitchell found him on Route 11. How many others were not retrieved in time? The records. As state investigators descended on Western State Hospital, Dr. Thornhill secured what Superintendent Morrison had fought hardest to conceal, the children's ward death ledgers. Between 1912 and 1920, Ward 7 admitted 247 children. 89 died, a mortality rate of 36%. By comparison, adult wards showed death rates between 8 and 12%. The causes of death told their own story. Heart failure in children as young as 6. Respiratory collapse in previously healthy adolescents. Natural causes listed without explanation for more than 24 patients. And 17 children with no death records at all. They simply vanished, administratively transferred to institutions that had no record of receiving them, released to families that did not exist. Gone. When Dr. Thornhill cross-referenced those names with the burial ledger, 14 matched unmarked graves. 3 did not. The arrests. Dr. Clarence Whitmore was arrested on March 19, 1920, at his home in Staunton. He had spent the previous 2 days burning documents in his fireplace, but investigators salvaged enough evidence to charge him with murder, gross negligence, and desecration of human remains. Nurse Helen Grayson was arrested the same day. At her home, investigators discovered journals of her own, entries describing her belief that defective children deserved to suffer, just as her perfect son had suffered before dying in the influenza epidemic. She viewed her work as divine justice, punishing the unworthy who lived while the worthy died. Hospital Superintendent Dr. Charles Morrison was not initially charged, but he resigned under public pressure. Later investigations revealed he had known of abnormal death rates in Ward 7 since at least 1915, and had attributed them to the natural weakness of defective bloodlines. The inquiry widened. Groundskeepers, attendants, physicians, most claimed ignorance. Some were clearly lying. A few testified to an institution where authority was absolute, where atrocities occur behind locked doors, and where asking questions meant losing one's livelihood, or worse, the trial that never came. Dr. Whitmore never stood trial. On April 3, 1920, guards found him dead in his cell at the Augusta County Jail. The official cause, suicide by hanging, using strips torn from his bedsheet, but the coroner noted inconsistencies. Ligature marks inconsistent with self-inflicted strangulation, bruising suggesting a struggle, a knot tied in a manner the coroner described as incompatible with suicide. 2 guards were suspended. No charges were filed. The official narrative held that Dr. Whitmore, overcome with remorse, had taken his own life. Nurse Grayson's trial. Her trial became Virginia's most sensational courtroom spectacle of 1920. The defense attacked the credibility of witnesses, many of them former patients. Can we trust the testimony of those the state itself has declared insane? Her attorney asked. Can we convict based on the fevered dreams of damaged minds? The prosecution responded with physical evidence. Journals, tunnels, graves. Expert after expert testified that children had been buried alive. that experiments had been conducted, that abuse had been systematic and prolonged. After 6 hours of deliberation, the jury returned its verdict: guilty on 3 counts of manslaughter, not murder. The defense had successfully argued that Grayson believed she was following orders and lacked the intent required for murder convictions. She was sentenced to 15 years. She served 7. She died of pneumonia in 1927. Her final words, according to the prison chaplain: "Tell them I was only trying to help. Someone had to make them understand what they were." The survivors. The boy found on Route 11 was never identified. No family came forward. After 3 months under Dr. Thornhill's care, he was transferred to a private facility funded by a charitable organization horrified by the case. Records indicate he was later adopted by a family in North Carolina under a new name. Dr. Thornhill maintained correspondence for years. In a 1935 letter, she noted the boy, now a young man, had become a teacher. He rarely spoke of Western State, but he dedicated his life to protecting children. 12 other children were identified as survivors of Whitmore's experiments. Some recovered with proper care. Others remained institutionalized for life, their minds permanently fractured. The 3 missing children remained on official lists for decades. In 1967, renovation workers at Western State Hospital uncovered a sealed chamber beneath the original building. Inside were 3 small skeletons. Forensic analysis dated them to 1918 to 1920. They were buried together in Thornhill Cemetery beneath a stone that reads, "The Forgotten Children of Ward 7. May they rest in peace." The cover-up. Public outrage faded. Virginia State Board of Health declared the events at Western State an isolated incident committed by individuals of severe moral deficiency. New oversight rules were introduced, inspections mandated, reporting requirements established. On paper, everything changed. In practice, little did. Western State continued as before, overcrowded, understaffed, dehumanizing. Children were still committed. Patients still died at alarming rates. As long as suffering stayed behind locked gates, the state looked away. Dr. Margaret Thornhill did not. She spent the rest of her career exposing institutional abuse. She testified before legislatures, published relentlessly, and personally lobbied governors for reform. She made powerful enemies. She received threats. In 1928, she was dismissed from Western State Hospital for creating discord and damaging the institution's reputation. She continued independently until her death in 1954. Her papers, donated to the University of Virginia, include an unpublished manuscript titled "The Children We Chose to Forget: Institutional Abuse in Progressive Era Virginia." In its introduction, she wrote, "We tell ourselves that monsters like Whitmore are aberrations, rare evils that emerge and are defeated. This is a comforting lie. Institutions create their own monsters. They reward them, protect them, and act shocked when their crimes are revealed. Whitmore did not operate in a vacuum. He operated in a system that valued efficiency over humanity, that classified entire lives as disposable, that turned suffering into statistics. Until we confront that system, the monsters will continue to emerge." And they did, because Virginia was not unique. And Ward 7 was not the last place where children disappeared, only one of the few where the earth finally gave them back. The Western State Hospital scandal broke at a pivotal moment in Virginia's eugenics movement. Rather than slowing the momentum toward forced sterilization, the case was twisted into justification for it. Proponents argued that the abuse proved their point. Defective individuals, they claimed, produced defective outcomes. The problem was not institutions that abused power. It was the existence of people deemed unfit. The solution, they argued, was not reform but prevention, preventing defective people from being born at all. In 1924, Virginia passed the Racial Integrity Act and strengthened its sterilization laws. 3 years later, the infamous Buck v. Bell case reached the United States Supreme Court. The ruling upheld forced sterilization and produced Justice Oliver Wendell Holmes, Jr. Chilling Declaration. 3 generations of imbeciles are enough. Between 1924 and 1979, Virginia forcibly sterilized more than 8,000 people classified as feeble-minded or unfit. Many were children. Many were institutionalized at facilities like Weston State. Many had never been mentally ill at all. They were poor, or orphaned, or victims of rape, or simply inconvenient. The program officially ended in 1979. Virginia did not formally apologize until 2002. The pattern emerges Weston State was not an aberration. As journalists dug deeper, similar horrors surfaced nationwide. In 1921, report emerged of children subjected to medical experimentation at the New Jersey State Village for epileptics. In 1923, investigations exposed brutal conditions at Pennsylvania's Penn Hill State School. In 1925, the Willowbrook State School scandal in New York revealed decades of abuse and neglect. Each followed the same pattern: public outrage, promises of reform, minimal structural change, then a quiet return to normal. The institutions were too convenient to dismantle. Families needed somewhere to send children they could not manage. The state needed places to warehouse those it considered problems. And the people inside had no political power to demand better. Real reform did not begin until the 1960s and 1970s, when investigative journalism, civil rights activism, and litigation finally forced the closure of many large institutions. But even then, the question remained, where did the people go? From institutions to homelessness, from asylums to prisons. The problem was relocated, not solved. Lessons in visibility, perhaps the most disturbing aspect of the Weston State case, is how long the abuse persisted in plain sight. Employees passed Ward 7 every day. Groundskeepers tended the burial plots. Administrators reviewed death statistics that should have triggered alarms. But institutions developed their own internal logic, their own normalized atrocities. What should shock becomes routine. What should provoke questions becomes dangerous to ask. The boy who remembered his burial shattered that normalization. His survival forced people to see what they had trained themselves not to see. One child's testimony unraveled a decade of systematic abuse. But how many voices went unheard? How many children tried to speak and were dismissed as delusional? How many times was the truth visible to anyone willing to look? Yet no one looked. The case forces uncomfortable questions about complicity, about the line between active cruelty and passive acceptance, about how easily suffering can be rationalized once we classify people as other. Dr. Thornhill understood this. Among her private papers was a letter from a former Western State attendant, written in 1932. You once asked how we could have known and done nothing. I ask myself that every day. We told ourselves they weren't really like us, that their minds were different, their pain less real. We told ourselves we were kinder than the world outside would be. We told ourselves anything that let us sleep at night. I cannot ask forgiveness. I can only beg you, never stop asking the question. Never let people forget what institutions become when we stop seeing inmates as human. Modern echoes of Western State Hospital case feel safely distant, sealed in the past, but its patterns persist. Abuse scandals still emerge from juvenile detention centers, psychiatric hospitals, and facilities for people with disabilities. Investigative reports use familiar language, inadequate oversight, understaffing, systemic failure. The names change. Defectives become at-risk youth. Feeble-minded become special needs. But the underlying dynamic remains. When people are removed from public view, stripped of political power, and placed in overwhelmed institutions, abuse finds fertile ground. The question Dr. Thornhill asked in 1920 still echoes today. Are we committed to preventing these tragedies, or merely to expressing shock once they are exposed? The boy who remembered his burial gave Virginia a chance to answer that question. The reforms were real but insufficient. Eugenic programs accelerated. Institutions remained overcrowded and dangerous. A few individual monsters were punished, but the system that created them adapted and survived. So, what do you think drove Dr. Whitmore and Nurse Grayson? Was it the eugenics ideology of the era, personal psychological darkness, or the corrupting power of unchecked institutional authority? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. The case of the boy who remembered his own burial remains one of the most chilling examples of institutional abuse in American history. not because it was unique, but because it exposed a pattern that extended far beyond a single hospital in Virginia. If you found this deep dive compelling, subscribe to Hypnotic Histories for more forgotten chapters of America's past, stories the textbooks prefer to omit. Ring the notification bell so you never miss our investigations into crimes, injustices, and mysteries buried in the archives. Until next time, remember, the most terrifying monsters are not the ones in our nightmares. They're the ones we create through silence, through systems, and through our indifference to the suffering of those we choose not to see.